Con Air began when Cameron Poe, an honorably discharged Army Ranger Sergeant, returned home after completing his duties. Poe then meets his wife, Tricia, at a bar, where he gets the good news that she is currently pregnant. However, in their joy, a group of delinquents interferes and verbally abuse Tricia. Poe intended to teach the thugs a lesson, but Tricia stopped him because she didn't want her husband to get into a fight. However, when they were about to go home, the thugs still mocked Poe, even daring to tamper with his proud military uniform. Poe, who could no longer hold his patience, then got into a fight with the thugs. With his self-defense abilities, he managed to cripple the gang of delinquents. Unexpectedly, Poe accidentally causes one of the thugs to be killed so that he must be legally tried for his actions. Because Poe was considered dangerous with his fighting ability, the judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison. Over time, Poe served his sentence in prison with a glimmer of hope and enthusiasm to survive until his sentence ended and he could meet his daughter and be with his family again. On the other hand, his wife continues to inform the child's development from time to time, so that Poe is even more enthusiastic about living his days with good behavior and spending time reading books and exercising his body. In prison, Poe shares a cell room with a young man named Mike who has diabetes. Long story short, 8 years have passed, and finally Poe will be released in a matter of days. The day of Poe's freedom came and the day of transferring several prisoners, including Mike, to another prison. Poe is set to hitch a ride on a flight to Alabama with Mike and the other prisoners. Elsewhere, a U.S. Marshal named Vince is assigned to oversee the transfer of high-profile criminals to Supermax prison on the same flight Poe and Mike will be boarding. Vince is then approached by a D agent named Malloy who orders one of his men, Sims, to disguise himself as one of the inmates to keep an eye on the other prisoners during the flight. The top criminals who will be transferred to Supermax prison are a mass murderer named Billy, a gangster named Nathan, and a professional criminal named Cyrus. After all the dangerous convicts had boarded the plane, now it was Poe's turn, who had been declared parole and only boarded the plane to return home. When all the prisoners were on the plane, a serial rapist named Johnny was seen, who proudly showed off the names of his victims which he deliberately tattooed on his arm as a memento. As it turned out, Cyrus and several other inmates planned to take over the plane and escape. They had prepared a small object hidden under their skin to open the handcuffs. On the other hand, one of the convicts, who is Cyrus' subordinate, makes a small noise to distract the guards as Cyrus and the others try to break free from the cage. In a short time, Cyrus, Billy, Nathan, and Johnny manage to knock out the guards and take control of the plane, which greatly irritates Poe. As they handcuff the guards, Johnny appears to be attracted to a female guard and intends to rape her. However, it was then opposed by Cyrus. When Cyrus and the others discussed their plans when the plane landed, Sims then got up, pulled out a gun and took one of Cyrus' men hostage. Poe tried to calm Sims down, but he ignored him until a commotion broke out and Cyrus killed Sims. Sims and several other prisoners had to die in the incident, which was very unfortunate for Bill because they had to drop off 6 prisoners at the next stop. Poe was eventually appointed to be one of the inmates who would disembark at the next stop. However, he tried to persuade Cyrus to let him stay on the plane and argued that his sentence was still 15 years and he wanted to run away with him and the others. In fact, he wanted to stay on the plane to thwart Cyrus and the others' escape plans. Poe then retrieves a tape recorder from Sims' body and plans to reveal the hijacking committed by Cyrus when the plane landed and unload the prisoners. Elsewhere, Vince and the guards find a hidden hole in the wall of Cyrus' cell, where he finds a note about an escape plan that Cyrus and several other prisoners will carry out. Not long after, the plane finally landed at Carson City, the designated stop, and 6 people were disembarked, including a guard. Poe then shoved Sims' tape recorder into the pocket of the disembarking guard, hoping that the cops down there would find out about the hijacking and take appropriate action. By pretending to be guards, Cyrus and the others dropped 6 people there, where they also raised several other prisoners who turned out to be his henchmen who had known about the escape plan. One of the newly boarded inmates, Williams, immediately took over the cockpit because he would be tasked with flying the plane to the planned location. After that, he removed the tracking device on the plane and ordered other inmates to place the tracking device into one of the planes on the Carson City runway. Not only Cyrus's colleagues who board the plane from the runway, but it also turned out that there was still one more inmate who would board the plane, which he was a serial killer named Garland. Garland's reputation as a psychopath and a ruthless killer is well known in the criminal world. Even Cyrus and his colleagues seemed reluctant and didn't want to get involved with Garland. One of the undercover officers thrashed when the plane took off, and the tape recorder in his pocket fell. A police officer took the tape recorder and eventually found out about the hijacking on the plane. The police then reported it to the U.S. Marshal. Meanwhile, at the U.S. Marshal's office, Vince and Malloy argue because Malloy intends to shoot down the plane, but Vince is adamantly against it because he still cares about the safety of the innocent guards and crew. Back on the plane, Cyrus tells Nathan to get Garland out of his cage. Although initially reluctant, Nathan finally removed Garland's headgear and released him from the cage. On the other hand, Poe takes advantage of Cyrus' trust in him and asks about their next destination, where Cyrus and his friends plan to go to a non-extradition country. After getting this information, he intends to tell the police down there. Poe returned to his seat next to Mike, where Mike looked unwell due to his diabetes, which required him to take insulin shots at regular intervals. Beside them, Garland was watching them with a strange expression. Not long after, the plane experienced problems with the landing gear. Cyrus then asked Nathan to check it. Not wanting to check it out himself, Nathan took Poe along with him. It turned out that the cause of the problem with the landing gear was because the body of one of Cyrus' men was caught in the hole in the plane's wheel. The man was assigned to place a tracking device on the Carson City runway. However, the plane took off before he could board, until in the end he was desperate to get on the plane's wheels. Nathan then ordered Poe to dispose of the prisoner's body while checking some items in the storage area. Poe took the opportunity to write a message to the U.S. Marshal about the hijacking of the plane and the purpose of Cyrus and his henchmen. After that, he dumped the prisoner's body and fell in the middle of the highway, which then caused a series of accidents. When finished, Poe, who intended to return to his seat, was stopped by Billy, who began to suspect him. But Poe came up with a reason that made sense enough for Billy to let him go. Even so, Poe was still worried that his identity as a former soldier would be exposed because Nathan told Billy that exciting items were stored in the storage area in the cargo hold. Meanwhile, Vince invites Tricia and her daughter to his office to inquire about Poe, who has provided valuable information regarding Cyrus's hijacking of the plane. After learning about Poe being imprisoned for defending his wife, Vince is increasingly convinced that Poe is a good person and can be the only chance to thwart Cyrus and his friends' escape plans and save innocent people. Vince's assistant then enters the room and informs him of a corpse falling from the sky, where there is a message addressed to Vince on the corpse. After knowing the message, Vince then contacted Malloy, who was on the air, to track the plane's whereabouts by following the signal from the tracking device. Vince tries to convince Malloy of Cyrus' destination. Still, the man persists in following the signal from the tracking device, which reveals that the tracking device had been removed from the plane and placed elsewhere to outwit the police. Since Malloy was unreliable, Vince planned to go there himself, but because he couldn't find air transportation that could take him there, he ended up driving Malloy's sports car, which was still parked there. He then drove at high speed to the location told by Poe. Turning to the plane, Billy finally finds out Poe's identity after finding his belongings. However, before Billy can reveal who Poe really is to everyone, Poe is forced to kill him. Elsewhere, Vince reaches the landing site first and hides in a warehouse. Shortly after, the plane made an emergency landing and nearly hit the fuel tank. Cyrus and his friends came down with 3 hostages who were the guards. When Nathan intends to kill the 3 of them, Poe comes and tries to prevent him by saying that they are still useful for their next plan, where Poe's words get Cyrus' approval. Their purpose in landing there was to refuel the planes and retrieve weapons. As Cyrus's men dug the ground for the plane to take off, Garland was seen wandering around the area and came across a little girl playing alone. Poe then told Cyrus that he was going to look for fuel, but he was actually planning to find a communication tool to contact the police. Unexpectedly, Poe was attacked by 3 local residents until finally Vince emerged from his hiding place and helped him. After incapacitating them all, Vince tells Poe that he has found out who he really is and has met Tricia and his daughter. Poe then tells Vince that he still won't leave until he saves the guards and prisoners who are not involved with Cyrus and his henchmen. Before long, the National Guard convoy was visible from a distance, so Cyrus and his henchmen armed themselves and prepared to face them. While Cyrus and the others are battling the National Guard troops, Johnny approaches Sally, the female officer, and intends to overpower her. However, Poe later discovered that he immediately attacked Johnny and handcuffed him. At the same time, Williams tries to fly the plane in all its limitations as there is no adequate runway, while Cyrus and the others escape the battle and rush to board the plane. The plane managed to take off quite smoothly. On the other hand, Malloy got to watch the sports car he was proud of fall free from a height as the plane rose higher and higher. After celebrating their success in escaping the Army's ambush, Nathan finds a letter written by Poe's daughter in a safe and hands it over to Cyrus. Knowing this, Cyrus threatened to kill the female officer. When Poe was about to confess, Mike suddenly stood up and said he was the box owner. Cyrus immediately shot Mike. At the same time, Vince and Malloy's 2 helicopters were seen shooting at their plane. Instantly there was chaos inside the plane and everyone seemed to be frantically seeking cover, except for Garland, who remained sitting still in his seat as if he didn't care about anything. Poe then immobilizes Cyrus and his men and rushes into the cockpit to communicate with Vince and ask them to stop shooting. When Malloy is about to shoot down the plane with a missile, Vince tries to convince Malloy to stop shooting by saying that Poe is on their side and is trying to thwart Cyrus' escape plan. Malloy finally listened to Vince's words and told his men to stop shooting. When Cyrus came to his senses, Sally hit him in the head, knocking him out. Due to the incident, the plane was forced to make an emergency landing in downtown Las Vegas due to an engine failure, which caused mass destruction and the death of Johnny. Not long after, the police and paramedics arrived who immediately rescued the victims, including Mike, who was still alive. In the chaos, Cyrus, Nathan and Williams escaped through the plane's undercarriage and managed to steal a fire truck to escape. However, Poe and Vince saw their escape, so they immediately chased the truck on police motorcycles. A tense chase ensues until Poe finally gets into the fire truck and incapacitates Nathan. However, Williams, who was behind the wheel, lost control, and in the end, the truck crashed and all three died. After a series of tense events, Poe finally gets to meet Tricia and, for the first time, to meet his daughter. The three looked happy and Vince was relieved that everything was over. As the surviving inmates are apprehended, the only one unaccounted is Garland, who gambles in a casino. There are many lessons that we can take from this film. The first is a law that is justly enforced when Poe gets the punishment he deserves for the murder he has committed, even though he was forced to commit the murder in defense of his wife. Second, even though Poe is a convict and retired soldier, but the man still has a high concern for saving innocent people. Even Poe was willing to delay longer to meet his family to quell the crime. On the other hand, Vince, who still trusts Poe, even though he is a prisoner, deserves appreciation.